I've learned that some crimes don't just scar the people closest to them. They change how an entire city breathes. They alter routines. They rewrite instincts. They teach people to look twice at places that once felt safe. For more than 20 years, that's what happened in Perth, Western Australia. Because for more than 20 years, no one could answer a single question. Who was taking young women from Claremont? In the mid-1990s, Claremont was known for its nightlife. Busy streets, bars and clubs packed on the weekends, well-lit sidewalks and a sense of security that came with familiarity. It wasn't a place people feared, which is exactly why what happened there felt so wrong. The first disappearance was Sarah Spiers. She was 18 years old. On the night of January 27, 1996, Sarah had been out with friends. Just after midnight, she made a phone call from outside the Continental Hotel. She called for a taxi. That call was the last confirmed trace of her. She never made it home. No witnesses saw her leave. No CCTV followed her steps. No physical evidence explained where she went. Searches were launched immediately. Posters went up. Volunteers scoured streets, bushland, anywhere a clue might hide. But days passed. Then weeks. And Sarah Spiers never came back. At first, people held on to hope. Teenagers run away sometimes. Phones get lost. Mistakes happen. But that hope didn't last, 'cause 4 months later Claremont lost another woman. Jane Rimmer was 23 years old. On June 9, 1996, she spent the evening out in Claremont. Like Sarah, she disappeared without warning. No phone call, no message, no explanation. 2 months later, her body was found in bushland at Wellard, south of Perth. Now the city understood what it was dealing with. This wasn't coincidence. This wasn't chance. Someone was hunting. Fear settled in quietly. Women changed how they went out. Friends walked each other to cars. Taxi rides were double-checked. Nightlife didn't feel carefree anymore. And still, no arrest. Then came the third disappearance. Ciara Glennon was 27 years old. On March 14, 1997, she vanished after a night out in Claremont. 3 weeks later, her body was found in bushland at Eglinton, north of Perth. 3 women, 3 nights out, 1 location. By then, the pattern was undeniable. Perth had a serial killer. What followed was one of the largest investigations in Australian history. Police received thousands of tips. Hundreds of men were questioned. Undercover officers worked nightlife districts. Vehicles were stopped. Streets were watched. At one point, investigators even staged decoy operations, hoping to draw the killer out. Nothing worked. Years passed. The investigation grew longer, and more expensive, and more frustrating. The Claremont killings became Australia's longest-running and costliest criminal investigation, and the families waited. For more than 20 years, technology lagged behind suspicion. Evidence existed, but it couldn't yet speak. Until science caught up. In December of 2016, police arrested Bradley Robert Edwards. He was a former Telstra technician. That detail mattered, because for years Edwards had legitimate reasons to be in neighborhoods. He worked around homes. He moved without raising suspicion. He blended in. What finally linked him to the murders wasn't a witness. It was DNA. Advanced testing matched Edwards' DNA to genetic material found beneath Ciara Glennon's fingernails. Investigators believed it came from a struggle. But that wasn't all. Blue polyester fibers were found on both Jane Rimmer and Ciara Glennon. Those fibers matched Edwards' Telstra work uniform and his vehicle. Then came a connection that reached even further back. DNA evidence also linked Edwards to a 1988 home invasion in Huntingdale. A silk kimono left behind at that scene had preserved genetic material, and to a 1995 assault at Karrakatta Cemetery. Crimes once thought isolated were suddenly connected. Pieces that hadn't fit before finally did. The trial was slow, detailed, heavy with expectation. On September 24, 2020, the verdicts were delivered. Bradley Robert Edwards was found guilty of the willful murder of Jane Rimmer and Ciara Glennon. But when it came to Sarah Spiers, the court reached a different conclusion. The judge stated it was highly likely Edwards was responsible for her disappearance. But highly likely isn't enough in a courtroom. There was no physical evidence. No body. And without that, there could be no conviction beyond reasonable doubt. For Sarah's family, justice remains incomplete. She is still missing, and unanswered questions don't disappear with time. What made the Claremont killing so difficult to solve wasn't a lack of effort. It was time, and timing matters more than most people realize. In the mid-1990s, policing was changing, but it hadn't yet caught up with the kind of evidence this case depended on. DNA testing existed, but it wasn't what it is today. Databases were smaller. Techniques were limited. Evidence that could speak now stayed silent back then. That silence cost years. In the early days, investigators cast a wide net. Thousands of tips came in from the public. Hundreds of men were interviewed. Police stopped vehicles leaving Claremont late at night. They questioned taxi drivers, bar staff, regular patrons. They watched. They waited. And still, nothing solid emerged. The killer didn't rush. He didn't repeat mistakes. He didn't draw attention to himself. That made him hard to see. One of the investigation's earliest challenges was geography. The women disappeared from Claremont, but their bodies were found far apart. One south of Perth, one north. That distance confused the picture. Was the killer local? Was he traveling? Did he know the bushland well enough to choose those locations? Every answer opened another question. Police even attempted decoy operations. Undercover officers posed as intoxicated women near nightlife areas, hoping to draw the offender out. They monitored streets, parking areas, and taxi ranks. But the killer never took the bait. That told investigators something important. This wasn't random. This was selective. As years passed, frustration grew. Evidence was reviewed, re-reviewed. Files were reorganized. New detectives took fresh looks at old material. But without a technological leap, progress stalled. The case became a shadow hanging over the city. Then came the breakthroughs. Not one sudden revelation, but a series of quiet advances. The first major shift came with improvements in DNA testing. For years, investigators had preserved biological material from Ciara Glennon's fingernails. It was believed she had struggled, but early testing couldn't produce a usable profile. The science advanced. That changed. New techniques allowed forensic experts to extract and analyze genetic material in ways that weren't possible before. And finally, the evidence spoke. The DNA pointed to a man already known to police, Bradley Robert Edwards. But investigators didn't stop there. They went back through everything. Fibers that once seemed insignificant were re-examined. Blue polyester fibers found on Jane Reamer and Ciara Glennon were traced back to Edwards' Telstra uniform and vehicle. That detail mattered, because fibers don't travel far on their own. They transfer through contact. Then came the moment that tied decades together. DNA evidence from two older crimes, a 1988 home invasion in Huntingdale and a 1995 assault at Karrakatta Cemetery, was retested. Both matched Edwards. Crimes that had once sat in separate files were suddenly connected by the same genetic signature. That's when investigators knew. They weren't just looking at a suspect. They were looking at a pattern that stretched across years. The arrest in December 2016 didn't come from a confession. It came from patience. From evidence that waited quietly until the world was ready to understand it. But even then, the case wasn't perfect. Sarah Spiers' disappearance remained legally unresolved. No body. No physical crime scene. Investigators believed Edwards was responsible. The judge later said it was highly likely. But belief and proof are not the same thing. And courts require proof. That's the hardest part of this case. Technology brought answers, but not all of them. The Claremont investigation stands as a reminder of two truths. First, justice can be delayed but not always denied. Second, some answers arrive too late to be complete. On December 23, 2020, Edwards was sentenced to life imprisonment with a non-parole period of 40 years, the longest sentence in Western Australian history. For some, it was closure. For others, it was confirmation of what they'd feared all along. Because this case reminds us of something important. Predators don't always look dangerous. They don't always stand out. Sometimes they wear uniforms. Sometimes they move unnoticed. And sometimes, they hide in plain sight for decades. I'm Detective Pennyworth. And this is one of those cases that reminds you, Justice doesn't always arrive quickly. It doesn't always arrive whole. But sometimes, it waits. And when it finally comes, it brings answers, even if they arrive too late for some. If you want to stay with these stories and the truths behind them, you can subscribe to the channel. We'll keep telling the cases that don't always come with answers, but still deserve to be heard.